A lot of things taking place in the world, including, of course, the news of Bill Belichick, the former New England Patriots coach, coming to UNC to be the head coach of that football team and all along those lines. Of course, there's important things happening in the world as well, including the fact that it looks like Donald Trump has been named Time Magazine's Person of the Year and everything along those lines. So that is one of the news stories that people have been talking about. And actually, I understand that he has invited the president of China to his inauguration on January 20th of 2025. Now, whether he shows up or not, that'll be the interesting question that some people will be asking and wondering about and all along those lines. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in that regards. South Korea's ruling party backs impeachment as president refuses to step down over martial law. So that's something else that we're seeing in the world as well as the South Korea president Yoon defends a martial law decree in a defiant speech. So definitely young Koreans seeing democracy at stake are taken to the streets. So definitely there are protests going on in that area. And some Syrian refugees in Berlin are pondering returning post Assad. Others are calling Germany home. So Europe Syrians shaken by debate over reparation to their war ravaged homeland or repatriation to their war ravaged homeland. So some people are thinking about going back to that area. We need time. Syrians in Europe resist calls to return home. And I want to say that we had a Syrian that might have been connected with the volleyball team that used to be on the network some time back. And I've got to find out from Nick if we still heard from that particular young lady or all along those lines. And Israeli strikes kill people guarding aid lorries, Gaza medics say. So Israeli strike on Gaza kills 35 Palestinians on Thursday, according to the Palestinian news agency. So IDF eliminates terrorist planning to seize humanitarian aid trucks in southern Gaza. So definitely a lot still going on in the Middle East as well. And an explosion in the Afghan capital kills the Taliban refugee minister. So Khalil Haqqani, the Taliban minister, was killed in a bombing in Kabul, and that looks like that took place on a yesterday or something along those lines. So looks like thousands attended the funeral of the Taliban minister killed by Islamic State suicide bombing. So a number of people are thinking about this as well. And Iran's leader blames the U.S. and Israel for Assad's fall and shifts tone toward the Syrian group. So Iran's supreme leader accused the U.S. and Israel of orchestrating the Assad ouster. So definitely that's something going on as well. And Romania and Bulgaria are granted full Schengen membership with definitely a caveat. So looks like Romania and Bulgaria have won full access to passport-free EU area. So definitely it looks like they have been integrated into Europe's ID check free travel zone. So that's something going on. And maybe Nick can tell us about that since he's over there in Spain. And an 11-year-old girl was rescued as the sole survivor of a shipwreck off of an Italian coast. So an 11-year-old girl survives 3 days at sea by clinging to a tire inner tubes. So definitely it looks like she has been rescued, and that is good news for that young lady and all along those lines. And violent protests in Georgia highlight battle over that country's future as hundreds of arrests and mysterious beatings as Georgia cracks down on pro-EU protests. So there does seem like some people are trying to get into the EU in Georgia. And Ethiopia and Somalia have reached a deal in Turkey to end the Somaliland port feud. So Turkey says Ethiopia and Somalia to negotiate Horn of Africa deal, and they've been agreed on a compromise to end the tension, according to what Turkish leaders are saying, and all along those lines. And Russia backs Orban's efforts for a Christmas ceasefire in Ukraine, as Zelensky slams Orban over call with Russia's Putin to discuss Ukraine. So Orban ends EU presidency with controversial ceasefire mission, too much to Ukraine's dismay. And the UN General Assembly passes a resolution on a Gaza ceasefire. They're demanding a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. And definitely some countries voted for it, some countries did not. So we'll see how this all plays out as well. And so definitely a lot's going on in the world and around the world, no doubt about that. And definitely we're hearing a lot of things, even here in the United States as well. So let me get to some of the United States news, and then we'll bring up some of the other folks as well. Luigi Mangione suffered from spondylosis a back condition. Expert says it could cause massive pain. So definitely United Healthcare CEO killing latest fingerprint and gun tied to the scene of the killing. And there's even some speculation I heard that maybe the CEO had tried to have himself killed, but I don't know that anybody is buying that. But I did hear that in one of the news reports and all along those lines. And Biden commutes roughly 1,500 sentences and pardons 39 people in a biggest single day act of clemency in modern history. So definitely this is a lot of folks. It seems like they were nonviolent offenders in the biggest single act of clemency to date. And FBI chief said he'll step out of the fray and definitely Ray's departure will cement Trump's control over the institutions of U.S. justice. So it does look like he's getting ready to step down at the end of Biden's tenure and all along those lines. And a missing U.S. man has been found in Syria, says he was kept in prison after entering the country as a pilgrim. So, man found in Syria appears to be a missing America, and he was detained by the Assad regime while on a Christian pilgrimage, and it looks like he has been freed. And a mistrial has been declared after jury deadlocked over the killing of a gay University of Mississippi student. So definitely, judge declares mistrial in Jimmy J. Lee murder trial after jury deadlocks. Man on trial in the Ole Miss student's death lied to investigators, is what police chief are saying. But it does look like there was a mistrial in that particular case. And Meta donates $1 million to Donald Trump's inauguration fund. So Mark Zuckerberg's Meta donates $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund. So who knows? Maybe there'll be a lavish inaugural event and all along those lines. And like I said, Trump was named Times Person of the Year for the second time, and Trump rings bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Cheers of USA as Wall Street CEOs and business leaders look on. So he definitely rang that bell and all along those lines. And a state of emergency is declared for West New York counties ahead of a snowfall. So they might be getting a snowfall in that area. And there's winter travel bans and advisories in West New York. So definitely looks like there might be some cold weather. I know we had a little bit of chilly weather, but it was nowhere near the kind of weather that would be in that particular area and all along those lines. So definitely lots going on in the world. I'm going to bring in Rick Rosner and Nick Palveda, see what they've got to say about a number of these stories and all along those lines, because a lot of things are taking place in the world, including the world of sports, because we have a famous coach that is going to be coming to UNC and everything. So we'll see if he can actually get involved in NIL, understand what he's getting into, because he had a illustrious career with the Patriots, but now he wants to be a college coach. So we'll see.
Congratulations. We had Deion Sanders come to my school, and he really made our school huge in football. So
yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It wasn't my school, but I do have folks associated with UNC, and they were definitely excited about that news. I know Nick spent some time in the Carolinas, even though he's in Spain now and everything, so they probably aren't even paying attention because they're very much into soccer and things like that, but they weren't even probably paying attention to this news, but they might have been paying attention to the Man of the Year conversation. So what do we think about Donald Trump becoming Man of the Year? And apparently he invited the Chinese leader to come to his inauguration. Now, whether the Chinese leader actually shows up.
Twitter likes to point out that Hitler was also named Man of the Year like 80 years ago. But Time magazine picks it on newsworthiness, not on whether they're a nice, good guy.
Yeah. Nick, what's your take on this? Donald Trump is the Man of the Year. You got that Donald Duck thing going again. Yeah, he'll have to go out and come back in because he got that little garbled voice thing happening once again.
One of the biggest pieces of news about this is the Time magazine still exists.
Right. Yeah, well, magazines in general, it's hard for magazines to get around and everything like that because Time magazine is still around. I think Newsweek is still around, but they're.
I mean, the Newsweek is. I don't know that they have a print edition. They're online. They're owned. Newsweek is owned by some kind of culty thing, so some of their news is actual news and some of it is questionable. I guess that's true for a lot of news sites.
That's true for a lot of news sites.
Like the Epoch Times, I think. When somebody quotes the Epoch Times, you got to really kind of double check what they are reporting, because sometimes they report news and sometimes it's nonsense.
Well, I mean, we have somebody connected with Epoch Times here and everything, because I think Rex Lee is part of their association, because he definitely has had some articles printed in there, and it definitely had some association with them. I'm not sure exactly what his association with that organization, but I do know that he is associated. Hey, Nick, one of the things I asked at the beginning of the news story, because I was talking about Syria, was I remember a couple of years ago when we were in the middle of this 4 to 5 year run with Pod TV, we had a young lady that was from Syria, and I think she was on the volleyball team. Have we heard anything from her since this Syrian fall, or have we heard from her in general? Because I do remember it was a
No,
young
I
lady.
don't know if she was from Syria, Mark, but the thing is, the real question is, who did, that you're saying the U.S. and Israel backed these people? I don't think the U.S. had anything to do with it, because they couldn't figure it out. Who to back who for what. So the U.S. basically pulled out of it. So really, this is just Russia and Iran getting their rears handed to them because they're too busy occupied in Ukraine. So, it's their fault, their problem. But in reality, the Syrian people may be better off because Assad was a complete jerk.
They say he killed he nerve gassed and bombed and shot, imprisoned, disappeared 500,000. He killed 500,000.
Yeah, and if you saw what they did to Aleppo, it was unbelievably bad. I mean, they just destroyed one of their major cities. So I don't have really much good things to say about Assad and the Russian regime.
We'll see
as far as the backing, it's not one group; it's hundreds of groups of people. Yeah. Oh. So I don't know. I'm sure the CIA, they probably have informants within the whole mess, but.
Well, I read an article earlier today that was actually, and you said that it was not their fault, but of course, now that Donald Trump is coming to office, there was an article, I think it was probably published by one of the right-wing publications and everything, that was saying that this could be one of the great faults of the Biden administration, the fall of Assad and everything like that, just like they blamed certain administrations for the fall of Afghanistan. So will the U.S. get any sort of pushback for Assad's fall? I understand that Russia.
He should have fallen. He was a terrible guy.
Yeah. I mean, he was a medical doctor by training, but a terrorist.
If you want to blame anybody, you blame Obama for setting a red line, saying to Assad, if you use nerve agents to kill your own people, you're in trouble. And then he used nerve agents to kill his own people, and we did nothing in response.
And that's typical U.S. foreign policy. But getting on to Donald Trump, I mean, I predicted over a year ago on this channel that he was going to go get the nomination. He was going to win the election. And, Biden showed up, he was bad. And when Kamala Harris came and the polls were showing that she was winning and everybody was clapping and wonderful, I put our own Pod TV LinkedIn polls, and we saw her losing by double digits. I didn't do it once. I ran it many times. And LinkedIn isn't your bastion of conservatives. They're usually business people and middle of the road people. However, the liberals drink their own Kool-Aid. They do it every day. What's important to them is not important to the American people. And there was just an article recently. They're involved in what they call identity politics. Now, identity politics just doesn't sell. Are you black? Are you a woman? Are you transgender? I mean, those are their big three issues, okay? And unfortunately, most of Americans don't care about those three issues. The liberals do, but the Americans don't. They want to care about can they afford a house? Can they afford groceries? Is the economy doing well? And then, of course, for whatever reason, they turn on immigration.
Nick, if Americans don't care, how come Americans have been talking about for years the fact that in the year, I believe it's 2040, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, and everything, and Rick, that America is supposed to be majority population that is minority or is brown or black.
They keep talking about that, but that's still not going to happen until the 2030s.
That goes back to the identity politics. And there's a huge article on the Democrats still are using the 1960s. Are you black? Are you a woman? And are you transgender? I mean, that's their big three issues.
And the Democrats
People
lost
look
their
at that.
Latino dividend.
Oh yeah, let's add the Latino.
Those, I mean, so the U.S. can go majority minority, which means that Whitey is in the minority. That he doesn't have 50% of the population anymore. But it doesn't matter if that means that Latinos are a third of the population, but 40% of them, 50% of them vote Republican. The idea is for Democrats to win, the Republicans have to stay confined to their old demographics, old people and white people, and then those people get minorityed out and aged out, and then you get a wave of Democrats. But that's not what happened in this election. You've got a bunch of new Republicans in young white bros and in Latinos.
Yeah, but also you saw the blacks moving over to the Republican Party.
A little bit.
It was like 15, 20%. Still not the majority. The majority of women, including African American women. If you watch our show,
identity politics. They're still.
Yeah, but you say identity politics, but even the reverse of identity politics.
Are you a woman and are you transgender? Those are their three big issues. Okay, and the fact is, yes, the super liberal left care about it. Yes, the super right hate it, but the middle people, which most people will make the difference, don't really care about it.
Well, the Biden campaign.
Can I afford a home? Can I afford groceries? Am I making more money? Is inflation not ravaging me? Those are the important issues, and the Democrats continually ignore it because the next thing they'll talk about, are you black? Are you a woman? Or are you transgender?
Well, okay, so the Democrats, I mean, the Biden campaign and the Biden White House seem to me to be, A, be hiding Biden, and B, to be super complacent, to not care about messaging the way Republicans are freaking relentless with messaging. Biden was a drill baby drill president. He drilled more oil than any previous president for 3 of his 4 years in office. But where's the messaging about that? Trump is saying he's going to be the drill baby drill. Where's the pushback on that? And so it's also like, and if Biden, so he broke his campaign promises, he should have broken some other campaign promises. If you had a time machine, Biden should have been as much of a prick about the border as Trump was. And Biden should have issued, hold on, one more thing. Biden should have sent checks to every American as inflation payments. Sorry, you're paying more at the grocery. Here's a check for $1,500. And yeah, it's inflationary, but still you get a freaking check. But they didn't do any of that and didn't do anything.
Hold on a second, we got the whole Biden thing, but the point that I brought up earlier was that Donald Trump won money like a drunk. Hold on a second, Nick, because I was going to bring up this quote here, but Jacoby and Shaquille had to say about it, because Donald Trump, hold on a second, Donald Trump
couldn't find a check he couldn't write. He
wrote, hold on a second, we got
PPP loans. He sent money to people. And so when you look at Biden, he thinks Washington, D.C. is just a printing press for money. And so he did it because that's how they got out of the Great Recession in 2008.
So he should have printed another
2008.
He should have
printed huge inflation, but he doesn't get it because he's not that smart.
He should have printed another $500 billion and send checks to people.
Hold on a second. I got it going, but I had a question for everybody on the panel. Hold on.
Corporate welfare. A big thing, and he did a lot of stupid things. Internet for all, that just created inflation. He did let's put charging stations for everybody. That just created more inflation. If you go through
charging stations were $7 billion, which is a
he's rightfully out of
line. Let's let Mark make his freaking point here.
Yeah, I was going to make a question for everybody, because apparently when he got named as the President of the Year and everything like that, Donald Trump savage Vice President Kamala Harris saying her biggest mistake was taking the assignment altogether. So the president-elect, who was given the magazine's lofty title on Thursday, said Harris' campaign was doomed from the start because you have to know what you're good at. That was his quote and everything along those lines. And then he also said, Trump said what he believes also cost her the election was her neglect, which we talked about on this show before, to reach a wider audience on the campaign trail by speaking to streamers and podcasters such as Joe Rogan, as he did. When she wouldn't talk to anybody, it shone a light on her, is what he said. So, she didn't do anything. And people said, is there something wrong with her? Why would they? I mean, I'm doing this interview with you. I did interviews with, if I had the time, anybody that would ask. I don't know if we ever asked. I do interviews, he said, and everything like that. So do you agree with his assessments of what was wrong with the campaign, which is basically that she entered the campaign and that she did not do enough conversation with the young votes, with the podcasters and the live streamers? So that's for everybody that is here. So Jacoby, you want to take it, and if Shaquille wants to take it as well.
So just a couple of quick things to push back on Nick to then jump back on. Actually, Trump spent more money than Biden did. Inflation is a global problem. So when you're saying that Biden created inflation, you're incorrect, because that was based on the recovery from COVID. However, no, I mean, it's just what happened. And then recovery
25% of the
COVID itself was was overlooked for Trump in the situation. But again, to get back to what you were talking about, Mark, time picking Trump is actually just fine, because Time Magazine normally picks their individuals regardless of whatever party, regardless of whatever they've done. It's just their impact upon what happened that year. And Trump actually did have a huge impact on the year. So time picking him was actually a good choice. But in terms of what he said, what Kamala Harris has done, she had 3 months to compete against the man who had been running for multiple years. So her name recognition was already low. She was already behind because, as we pointed out, 28 of the 33 elections, the incumbents lost. So basically,
27 worldwide. There's
worldwide
people are voting incumbents out.
Yeah, so worldwide, the
27 out of 33 elections in 2024 around the world.
So worldwide, the incumbents were actually losing. So she had the headwinds of that to deal with. Yes, she could have reached out.
That's no excuse. You still have to win your frickin' election.
Yeah. So that is part of the headwinds that she's having to deal with. It is tough to go up against a juggernaut in Trump, as well as the messaging that the Republican Party does, because they are phenomenal at messaging. They really, really are. And that is one of the best things that they do. So not having a coherent message that was going to be able to land and stick the way that they needed it to stick, she had to hit everything perfect. And there's no possible way that she could have done that in 3 months. So yes, there are things that she could have done better, tons of things that she could have done better, but it was almost an impossible feat to deal with 3 months of campaigning to win this election.
Okay, well, once again, Jacoby, you're wrong. Okay, the CBO said this specifically: the debt under Biden, 7.2 trillion higher than it was when Trump left office. Trump's debt was 6.5 trillion. Once again, you're drinking your own Kool-Aid, because you heard that Trump's debt was higher than Biden because some leftists said it was true. But that is not true. The CBO says specifically.
Did Trump spend 25% of the national debt when he was in office?
So once you get your facts right,
Nick, I'm asking you a question because you just correct me. You just correct me. I'm asking you a quick question.
Just make up the
did Trump spend 25% of the national debt when he was in office?
I'm just giving you the numbers.
I ask you a simple question. If you're correcting me,
giving you the simple.
Here's the freaking deal. Obama spent
7.9 trillion in debt.
Did Trump spend 25% of the national debt when he was in office?
They spent about the same amount. I don't know the exact number, but Obama spent trillions and trillions pulling us out of the crash of 2008. Then Trump spent 8 trillion, on Trump stuff. And then Biden spent roughly that much, on post-COVID, and then on infrastructure. So, I mean,
he spent a lot on stupid corporate welfare ideas.
No, he spent it on COVID.
Anybody that had their hand out, Biden wrote a check to. And that
There was
created
COVID recovery
inflation.
that we were having to deal
And
with that he
that's the
spent
reason
money
why,
on.
unfortunately, that's the reason Kamala Harris lost.
Yeah, well, that's irrelevant. Now we're dealing with what's going to happen in the new office. I did have a question for Shaquille really quickly because he spent some time in North Carolina with different candidates. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that he met the gentleman that I'm going to meet. And Jacoby may even know him as well. But what is our thoughts? Because even Dan has talked about Bishop, who is one of our congressmen here and everything, and he's now going to be deputy secretary for the office of OMB, Office of Budgets, and all along those lines. I forgot what the initials stand for, but I think Dan Bishop was one of those people that you might have met along with the gentleman from that ran for governor here and everything. But I could be wrong, Shaquille. So did you meet Dan Bishop? What is your thoughts around this notion of him being deputy secretary of, because he's going to be leaving North Carolina to take a job. He ran for attorney general, did not win that job, but Trump just named him today to be the deputy secretary of OMB, which is management and budget.
No, I haven't met him. I've met former Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest,
Okay.
not Dan Bishop. I'm a bit surprised that I sort of very patiently waited and took notes actually about, because I'm always told not to interrupt and talk over anybody. So I was just taking notes from Nick and Jacoby and Rick about how to do that properly. So thank you for that example. And as soon as it's my turn, we're going to change the subject as if my analysis of what happened in the election isn't valid. So
No, let's hear it.
if that's the case,
but we've done this.
If that's the case, that's perfectly fine. I'll hand it over to Adam. Adam, did you have anything to say?
Go ahead with your analysis, but I'm personally, and this is just me, because I've heard Jacoby's argument several times. We've had this analysis several times. The election's over. Kamala lost. It's plain as day she lost. Donald's getting ready to come in. We've analyzed
that's perfectly fine, Mark. So because we don't want to talk about it, what we should do is let Jacoby, Rick, and Nick, and yourself talk about it for 24 minutes. From the time that you finish your monologue to the 24-minute mark, and then change the topic. And then change the topic.
Bring it up at all. Nick brought it up, and I didn't.
So Nick's brought it up. Okay, so Nick's brought it up. You've asked me repeatedly, not you, but everyone else, that I interrupt too much. So I quietly sat back and waited for the so-called round robin to occur. Waited to see how you guys would keep your comments to under 60 seconds, like you're constantly lecturing me to do. And then when you finally get around to asking me a question, you're asking me a question about North Carolina on World Edition. Fair enough. Well, if you don't want to talk about it any further, if you don't want to talk about it any further, I'm happy. If you don't want to talk, I'm still going to finish my sentence.
Go ahead with.
If you don't want to talk about any further, I'm happy to hand it over to Adam.
No, go ahead with the comment you want to make, Shaquille. Like I said, I was not expecting to go down an analysis of the election because we've done this now for weeks, but I was not expecting Nick to go down this path. But since we've gone down this path, and since you want to comment on it, go ahead.
I'm going to say it again. I'm going to hand it over to Adam.
Adam,
Okay.
if you want to make a comment, go ahead.
Oh, okay. We may have covered this before, but the reason that Donald Trump won was because his messaging more closely aligned with what the American people were experiencing. Inflation, high grocery prices, housing prices, high gas prices. Average Americans like me were struggling financially, and he spoke to those concerns. Kamala Harris spoke to more broad concerns, more intangible concerns about democracy and about reproductive rights. Well, at the end of the day, Americans are going to vote based on their personal financial circumstances. And I can tell you personally, when gas prices here were $3.50 a gallon and groceries were 30 to 35% higher, I mightily struggled. And I looked back and said, under Trump, it was different. And that's why Trump won and appealed to a working class electorate that traditionally had gone Democratic. Now, sure, there's racist and sexist, no doubt about that. But were they the driving factor in the election? No, the driving factor was not the economy per se. It was inflation, gas prices, housing prices, and the lived experience of Americans.
And Adam, I can agree with what you just stated. Because a lot of the messaging, again, for example, one of the biggest things that happened after the election, because this is why I say that the economy was not the major, it was a part of it, was because after the election happened, one of the biggest spikes that happened was on Google, the search for tariffs. So they really didn't understand the economics that they were voting for. They just knew that they were frustrated at what was going on, which is why I bring up across the globe, there were multiple, the majority of incumbent president or incumbent government entities lost because everybody during that time was upset at what was going on, especially in their country, due to the same things. The inflation was spiking. So, and that was a global issue that people were mad at. So yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying that he spoke to, because he tapped into something that the Democrat Party never really is able to do because of the messaging. Also, a quick correction: the net 10-year debt approved, Donald Trump was 8.4 trillion. Joe Biden was 4.3 trillion.
Yeah, I think there was another issue too. I think that immigration was an issue too for Americans, because what we saw was a much higher level of illegal immigration. Now, Republicans, I'm not a Republican, but I assume we're not against immigration. We're not against diversity, but we do believe in enforcing our laws. And there was such a spike in illegal immigration and a reticence to secure the border that I think affected Harris tremendously, particularly given those isolated cases where, illegal undocumented immigrants murdered individuals like Lake and Riley. I think Kamala Harris needed to come with a more specific plan to help Americans in their everyday lives, and with a more specific plan on immigration. She didn't do that, and I think she was hurt terribly by using Hollywood actors to try to advance her cause, because when the country is hurting, the last thing they want to hear from is rich elites. So I think those were mistakes.
I disagree.
The other thing that we've said.
Go ahead, Shaquille.
That's okay. We'll go to Jatovi. I'm not allowed to interrupt him. We've established that before, so go for it, Jatovi.
No, it's your turn, Shaquille.
So the other thing that we've seen, and this is what I think is more a reason for why Democrats lost, is that they refused to listen to anybody, including themselves. And we've seen that from this group of people that try to insulate themselves and disagree and refuse to, just like when people say, hey, the polls are showing something. No, they're not. No, they're not. So, for example, the polls showed that abortion was not actually the primary issue going into this election, that when people were polled, when women were polled especially, it was only a major issue for 30%. That was only the first issue for 30% of women under the age of 30, right? It used to be 40%, and that number came down. And actually, as you went up the age bracket, it became lower and lower percentages of it being the most important issue. So why would Democrats run as if that was the primary issue that everyone's going to be motivated on? And you notice this after the election, that people are saying, well, you voted against women. You voted against, you voted against somebody who's black. No, that's not why Americans voted the way they did. All right, but people on the right are constantly having to say, "Oh, yeah, look, we acknowledge that there is some racism, there is some sexism." Of course, in a country of 350 million people, there is. That's not enough to sway an election. Who in their right mind is going to go down to vote and say, "Oh, I love everything that this person it stands for, but they're black and they're a woman, so I'm going to vote against them"? Who does that? I mean, it's just crazy talk, and it takes away from the reality of what people have been saying. The thing that Jatovi's talking about with Kamala Harris having such a short period of time to run a campaign. Yeah, she did have a short period of time, but again, whose fault was that? It wasn't Republicans' fault. Whose fault was it? The entire world, and even some people within the Democrats, were telling them Joe Biden's too old. He's just not going to be able to make it through to the next election. And Democrats, oh, no, that's not happening. When the whole world could see him fading away at international events, oh, they're cheap fakes. You're not seeing it. It's a right-wing conspiracy theory. The other thing I just want to say lastly is this idea that you're going to celebrate white people being in the minority. What kind of ridiculous thing to celebrate is that? It's not about inclusivity. The left are the racists in my eyes. The left are the misogynists and the sexists and all the rest of it. That's how I feel about it. I base that on my experience of dealing with left-wing political parties and their supporters all over the world. I'm tired of it, and you can tell how insincere they really are. As soon as they come across somebody who shares a skin color or an ethnicity that the Democrats or center-left political parties around the world, we're talking about Democrats in this situation, if Democrats believe that that person should be voting Democrat, they will attack and attack and attack that person based on their sexuality, their race, their gender, anything that they can in order to try to humiliate that person. And you've seen that with Clarence Thomas. You've seen that with Thomas Sowell. You see that with all sorts of people who are black, who are women, with Larry Elder going to Los Angeles. How does he get described by the left? The black face of white supremacy. I mean, fancy saying those sorts of things. But when do you hear those sorts of comments being made by people on the right? You don't. And the majority of people don't talk like that. The majority of people don't gravitate towards that. So personally, I think that when it comes to unhinged racism, sexism, misogyny, letting people down, making promises that you can't keep, representing things that aren't true, I think that you should be looking at the Democrats for that side, not blaming on Republicans. The last thing I'll just say to Rick's comment, if you really believe, and I'm teasing you, Rick, clearly I'm teasing you, if you really believe that it would have been a better idea for Joe Biden to break more of his election promises, I have to kind of finish what I was saying or repeat what I said to you yesterday. If you're really unhappy with the Democrats, maybe give MAGA a whirl, because they'll welcome you.
So in partial agreement with what you're saying, my favorite people on Twitter, and I don't have any friends outside of this show and Twitter, are never Trumpers, who are Republicans. I like Republicans who aren't Trump. That doesn't
when I get over there, I'm going to take you to a Republican event right there in California, and I can tell you now, if you've got an open mind, you'll have plenty of friends, because Republicans are actually very, very welcoming. And I think Cenk Uygur actually said this on the PBD podcast just recently, and I thought it was a really interesting point. He said, Democrats, if you're on their side, but you disagree with them like 10%, they want to get rid of you. Get out. You're not welcome. Your views are invalid, etc. Just we want nothing to do with you. Republicans, especially the MAGA crowd, if you only agree with 10% of what they say and you're politically homeless, come on in, welcome in. And I actually think that that's something that we have seen around the world with other centre-right political parties and more nationalist political parties. That's what we've seen. And that's why I think you're seeing a lot of incumbent governments being voted out.
You're partially right. You're partially right. Anybody, regardless of their politics, 95% of people, you talk to them one-on-one, you talk to them not about politics, you find out they're a sweet person. I'm sure most MAGAs, except for the most lunatic, and also most Democrats, except for the most lunatic, are fine people, to copy a Trump phrase, when you get them one-on-one.
You know, it's interesting, Mark. I didn't realize this until about a week ago, but I had a revelation about one of the panelists on this show, namely Rick, that I think is very relevant to the election. After hearing Rick, talk about his opinions and his analysis of policy issues, I came to the conclusion that Rick is not actually a liberal. He is not a Republican, but Rick is not a left-wing progressive liberal. Rick is somebody who is a moderate who bases his opinions on facts. And I think that in the election, Democrats misjudged that. They thought that their party members would fall in line with what they were messaging. And that's why they were wrong, because people aren't going to just align with identity politics or party. They're going to look at issues and think about them and how they affect them. And so, Rick, I'm not saying that you're not a Democrat, but I'm saying I don't put you in the category of someone who is liberal. I put you in the category of a thinking person who's going to vote based on practicality.
Let me say,
and that's how most Americans are, and the Democrats misjudge that.
I think I'm a 30%er. I think 30% of everybody is more liberal than me, which means I'm only 20% of the population away from being right in the middle. But mostly I'm a nihilist, that I think government's never going to be able to do especially the huge ponderous government of the U.S. is never going to be nimble and
But
never
Rick,
going to do it.
I totally agree with that.
But Rick, but based on what you're saying, though, and that's why I've hammered you about this a bit over the last year or so, what you're talking about is more classical liberal ideas, right? Government is not going to do things very well, so their power should be restrained. Small businesses should be able to flourish without the burden of over-regulation, and we need taxes to pay for social services. Like, that's a classical liberal type of thing. Now, you might be more prepared to be more exploratory of new issues, like the trans issues are fairly new issues, right? So at first, you said that at first you're prepared to go with it, then you start to have some concerns. That's sort of classical liberal kind of thinking. In my opinion, the Democrats have actually moved away from you. You haven't changed. The Democrats have, right? Now, the Republican Party has also changed. The Republican Party is no longer the party of ultra-conservatives. They're no longer the party of big business. They're no longer the party of protecting businesses the way that they used to 20 and 30 years ago, which is why you've seen a whole heap of former big-name establishment Republicans leave the party, because it's no longer the party that they were from. The party dynamics have changed. But I can tell you now that, when I get really mad at the Tories in the UK, I get really mad at the Liberal National Coalition, which is the conservative side of politics in Australia, much more so than I ever get mad at the Labor Party. Why? Because it's my side of politics. And when they do things I don't approve of, I get really mad that they're taking advantage of my vote, that they know I'm going to vote for them anyway, and so they're just going to do things I don't agree with. And the best way for me to counter that is to say, you know what? Don't take me for granted, because I just might vote the other way. And I think that that's been a big part of the reason why people have started to vote or started to switch over to Donald Trump. It's because of the disillusionment that they found in establishment Democrats, to use that
Just
term.
really quickly, I think that
I just wanted to get in real fast
yeah, go ahead.
because we touched on just a couple of things. One, purity tests. Purity tests are on both sides. Honestly, purity tests are more so on the Republican side than they are on the Democrat side. Why do I say that? Because right now, it was Elon Musk, the big business billionaire, the richest man in the world, has already told any Republican who disagrees with Donald Trump, you're going to be primaried against. So when you say that we're welcoming to all these ideas, those ideas have to be in line with a particular way of thinking. So again, it happens on the Democrat side, and that's what's out there right now. But it is very true that you are primaried if you disagree with Donald Trump, if you're not on the MAGA wing. So that right there in itself is a counterpoint to saying that only the Republican Party is all this welcoming. It's not true. Also, if you're talking about the Republican Party and you try to push this whole idea of racism, one, the Confederate battle flag, the representation of racism itself, where is that flown? It was only flown on the Republican Party at different Donald Trump rallies. It was never flown at a Democrat rally or anywhere there. So to point out racism and then just ignore the fact of the racism that is there is really, really bad. So no party is free of racism. There are racist Democrats, but honestly, if you look at who is put in power in the Republican Party, from a Stephen Miller, who is a well-known white supremacist. Yes, white nationalism is white supremacy. Yes, Christian nationalism is white supremacy. Honestly, there is a town in Tennessee right now that's trying to be taken over by Christian nationalists who've already put out their document talking about how they're unacceptable of anybody of any other race except for the white race, and they want to go back to before the actual civil rights movement was taken over. Look it up. It's very true. There is actually an individual in the office who Donald Trump put into power, who's trying to put into power right now, who comes out of that group. So all these things, and yet, Democrats are historically the party of racism. Do you realize when you say that is completely ignorant, Adam? The reason and remember, ignorance not stupid. Ignorant just means lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge is pointing out the fact that, yes, the Democrat Party did create the KKK. The KKK was also the start of the actual police force. So when we talk about the Democrat Party, we forget about the civil rights movement, which in the civil rights movement is when the split from the Dixiecrats left out. And then Nixon and the others came in and created what was called the Southern Strategy to actually draw in.
Okay, so that was 60 years ago. And the Civil War was
that happened after the actual civil rights movement. And then to move into now, it took forever since the Republican Party to even acknowledge MLK's birthday in Arizona. That didn't happen till the 2010s. So that is also part of racism that was sitting there. So again, all these positions of power, yes, there's racism. And then the big business, you cannot say that the party of big business is the Democrat Party when the party who actually is placing billionaires who owns these businesses and giving tax cuts to businesses and created a Citizens United problem that gave businesses actually personhood. So you cannot say that the party of big business is the Democrat Party. And then they're also the party of racism, but then point to the 54s when it was just in the late 2020s when the Republican Party did all this big business stuff. You cannot ignore these things. So yes, the Democrat Party has an issue, but what you stated is all fallacy. It's part of the messaging that gets put out. And that is what the Republican Party does.
I have two things. When you don't have competent government that stays abreast of the world, and I don't know that we'll have competent government for the next 4 years, you're rolling over and yielding to the fucking robots. ChatGPT just updated. It's now 50 times faster than it used to be. And a buddy and I spent an evening talking with ChatGPT saying, should we be worried? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? ChatGPT did not disagree. So now I think tech disruption will bring us a bunch of good things, but it'll also bring us a bunch of creepy dystopian things. And when you have, there's a similarity between the Syrian government and the U.S. government. Let me explain. Where Syria is replacing this asshole murderous dictator with, well, we don't know. It's a coalition, and not even a coalition. It's a mob of hundreds of different factions. And that's kind of like the Democrats, where Democrats have this big tent and everybody in the big tent is arguing with each other. And it's, when you say, it's hard to get a coherent position and forceful leadership.
But you have had a coherent position. The coherent position is that people's sexuality, their skin color, and their gender are the most important things, and they should override concerns about anything else. This is what we've actually said. Now, additionally to that, when I've talked about racism, I'm talking about it today. I notice that Jacoby wants to go back to, 60 years ago, 600 years ago, I don't know, whenever, in order to try to bring up examples. And then he starts to bring up examples of people that he is describing as being white nationalists. And this is typical behavior of Democrats. They're very, very selective in how they frame things, right? So I noticed in there was a couple of comments. One was the display of the Confederate flag. Now, I understand that this is somewhat contentious in the United States, but just because you think it is racist doesn't mean that everybody else does. And I can tell you, I've got black friends of mine that have Confederate flags and are quite proud of the flag. All right. It does have a meaning which is different to just racism. All right.
What's the meaning?
That's first of all. Well, you can Google it, Jatova. You're so good at doing that. Secondly, this issue about the tax cuts for big business, right? And the Republicans are clearly the big business people because they've got Elon Musk. Well, Democrats have got every bank, every major hedge fund manager, all of big media. I mean, you've got all big, and not only do you have all of big business, that was actually part of your campaign thing that you guys were talking about. Look at how all the big CEOs are backing Kamala Harris. So what are you talking about? You're trying to gaslight everyone. Oh, well, he's got what? All these billionaires. You mean one? You're talking about Elon Musk, right? Tax cuts. tax cuts that benefit the rich, as I've talked about ad nauseum on these shows. All tax cuts are going to benefit the rich if the rich are the only ones paying it. What do you want? In relation to company tax rates, if you wanted to do something, I would suggest increasing or decreasing the taxes in order to make sure it's competitive internationally. That's obviously important. And then if you want to do something to capture profits that are being generated by American companies that are being offshore to foreign shareholders, a problem that Australia also has, introduce some kind of withholding tax on the dividends being paid or some kind of withholding tax on the profits generated from those shares at their disposal. There are all sorts of things that America can do in order to try to shore up its revenue. But the only thing the Democrats want to say is soak the rich, eat the rich, all this kind of stuff. It doesn't work. People are tired of it. People are waking up to it. I think Democrats are not only taking advantage, as I said before, of people they know are going to vote for them no matter what, but they're also making a very bad miscalculation. They are making the assumption that the everyday American is an absolute idiot. And whilst I can attest that some are, that's not the majority.
So
Well,
just
hold on a second, just really quick, because I haven't spoken. Hold on a
out-
second, Rick, because I haven't spoken that much. One of the things that I was partially with you, because I think it is a bad mistake, because even in the whole notion of race and everything, because even on this network, we've had a couple of people that have observed that there's about to be a whole movement of people that are going to sit out the next election and sit out politics because they are frustrated that they didn't get the win. So I don't know if you're aware of this, Shaquille, but there is a whole movement. I know that Jacoby's aware of it, of Black women that are basically saying F the community. There's even supposed to be a march, a women's march, and they're basically like, no, I'm not going to participate. And there's a whole movement. There's even been people on this network that have said that they are frustrated because they thought that they got stabbed in the back, for lack of a better term.
Mark, that was all part. Because Black people knew the assignment and did the assignment. So they were.
What was the assignment? Vote for Democrats, like they always do.
They're upset about what took place. Yes, so there are going to be a lot that are going to sit out. There are a lot that are a part of the FAFO movement, which is actually starting to pick up a little bit more steam. But just to point out, just because you have one of your friends that's a Black friend wearing a Confederate flag, there's a Black woman who has her own store who sells Confederate things. That doesn't mean that the Confederate flag does not mean what it means. The flag was actually, and again, this is history. This is the stuff that I know that you may not know. So this is not saying that you're stupid, but this is just saying that you may not have the knowledge on that. So the actual flag that they are flying, for example, which was reintroduced, because the Confederate flag is actually different from the Confederate battle flag. What they're actually flying is the Confederate battle flag. That battle flag and the Confederate flags have actually disappeared after the war because it was actually put down. But then it got reintroduced, and actually it was these Daughters of the Confederacy who actually started reintroducing different educational things in our education system, which forced different books and first different things way back in the late 1800s, going into the early 1900s. But then that flag itself got reintroduced in our society during the Jim Crow era, because it was down in the South where they wanted to just point out and remind Black individuals, because they were not accepted in the South, which is why there's such a problem. It was the Dixiecrats that actually reintroduced this flag in the early 1900s. So it actually disappeared and came back up. But then the flag itself, the flag was told, when it was reintroduced, that it was actually a Southern thing, and it was actually flown to tell Black people these particular things. It was actually it was flown by representing the flag that was flown by an actual army that still wanted to keep it. Actually went to a civil war over slavery. And that is what the Civil War was fought for. I don't care what you have to say that you feel, but no, it is in the documentation. It is actually written that there was fought because it was in the Articles of Secession. If you want to go back in history and try and rewrite the Articles of Secession from these actual states that actually wrote that they were wanting to secede from the nation over slavery, that is your problem. The
All right,
fact
so
is,
Well, can I say something?
Hold on. If
So
you want to
again-
talk about the Confederate flag, you got to talk about the Dukes of Hazzard. For people who were kids in the 80s, the Confederate flag was fun because it was on the top of the General Lee, the Duke boys' car. The same show gave us booty shorts, Daisy Dukes. And then when they made the movie,
All right, look,
2000, hold on.
Sorry.
In 2005, they kept the flag, and that was the last moment of using the flag as fun. And since then, they can't even show reruns of the Dukes of Hazzard.
So look,
Right,
I highly
so
disagree
hold
with
on a
what's been
second.
said by Jacoby and the flag and its meaning and the reasons of the Civil War and what's been reported in the history books about the causes of the Civil War and the results of it. So I highly disagree, and I've got into that on many shows before. But Adam, you want to say something?
Yeah.
Historians in history.
So I just had 2 quick points. Number one, I found it very ironic that the Democrats ran on this theory of saving democracy and that Trump was a threat to democracy. Well, when Trump won, all of a sudden they don't like democracy too much and are now pledging not to vote. It's absolutely ridiculous. Democracy was never the issue. The poor messaging of the Democrats, not recognizing that inflation, the border, housing prices, and gas prices were the issues, was the problem. Number two, as far as racism goes, there really is no systemic racism anymore. There is no institutional racism. And I'm proud to say this country has gone away from a very, very nefarious past and largely eradicated racism. But what is a problem is single-parent Black families. We shouldn't be talking about Confederate flags. We should be talking about the fact that 73% of children are growing up in single-parent Black families. We should be addressing the fentanyl crisis with white people in states like Indiana. We need to be talking about the real issues. And the number one issue is the breakdown of the family in Black and white communities. So forget about Confederate flags and all of this nonsense. Let's help people. Let's make a meaningful difference in people's lives by addressing the issues that are affecting them on the ground.
So
Well,
And I
Really
think
quick,
the Republicans and this lineup of that Donald Trump is
How
talking
does discussing a
about,
flag help anyone?
like with RFK, for example, talking about food additives and all the rest of it. I think that's absolutely brilliant. I think that what they're doing is trying to deal with real issues that are going to have a positive effect on Americans' lives. And hey, I look, I know that not everyone's going to be happy with it, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And as for people that don't want to vote, look, if you really are unhappy with the way that Republicans run the country over the next 4 years, at the ballot box is exactly where you need to be. The fact that you lost, lick your wounds, suck it up. That's how democracy works. You don't always get the wins you want.
Well, like I said, hold on a second, because we only got a minute or two to go. And everything.
I want to respond to Adam. I want to
I
respond
do.
to
I
Adam.
want to
He's
respond to
right
Adam.
about single-parent families, and prison and police reform can address some of that, where Black guys get arrested and incarcerated at a huge rate. Instead of throwing Black guys in jail for bullshit, imprison them in their families. Give them a freaking ankle bracelet if you've got it, and just say you're staying home and not like
Rick, what is the bullshit that you
So
say
Rick,
is wrongfully imprisoning African Americans or whites or any people of any race?
all the people who were
selling drugs?
in prison
I think there's no
for
institutional
freaking
racism.
marijuana,
You, Adam.
for pot.
There is a minuscule prison population for marijuana
Those
possession.
people,
That is
those people that were locked up for pot were locked up by
Majority
people
of
like
people
Kamala
are
Harris. It was
violent
Democrats that did
crime.
that. Even Bill Clinton. Even Bill Clinton admits that he had a national policy to do that.
We're trying to make this thing political. It's not really political. What it is, honestly, Adam, the irony of the
I've heard it
situation,
all now.
what you just stated about because what Rick pointed out to you is that there are African Americans that are incarcerated at a higher rate, but you point out that you're saying that there's a problem with single Black families. And then you stated that there is no institutional racism that is there. That within itself is talking about the systemic and institutional racism that still exists in our society today.
Well,
So
Jacoby,
that
look
right
at
there-
the crime statistics.
You
Blacks
cannot
are
say-
13% of the population, but commit over 50% of the murders. Is
Here's
that
the
not a
question.
fact?
Is that not
Are
institutional
black
racism?
people inherently criminals?
Okay, well let's put it like this, Mark.
So
Let's
then,
put it like this.
we're not
If it
saying
is
that
institutional
Jack,
racism,
hold on.
who was
Adam
in
and I are
charge
having
of
a
the
good
institutions
discussion.
that
Adam and I are
created
having a
this
good
long-lasting
discussion.
racism?
Adam and I
It
are
was
having a really good
Democrats.
discussion.
And it's been Democrats in recent history
No,
that has created these
no,
sorts of
no,
problems, such as
no,
Kamala
no,
Harris
no,
when she
no.
was running
Rudy
the
Giuliani was
law and
ahead
order
of the
in California,
Rudy Giuliani,
such as
Shaq, you don't know
what we've
you're
seen
talking
all
about.
over the country.
You're
It's
just
been
gaslighting.
such as when Bill
That's
Clinton
not
was
why.
around. It's been when Democrats have decided to do something about law and order.
But it's been law and order was a popular thing with the Republican Party as well.
Yes,
I mean, Reagan was
and
very much law
Rudy
and order.
Giuliani was the head of the state that started the stop and frisk. That was a whole black thing, and that really hurt the African American community completely. The war on drugs was started by Ronald Reagan, and that was a whole thing that attacked the black community. Yes, they had the imprisonments and everything. So no party has an institution on this actual racism issue. But what you're trying to do is actually water it down and make it into something stupid. So
Single parent families are destroying the black
let's have
community.
an educational discussion on it. So if we get back to the institutional and the systemic racism that is still there, because African American men, African American women, actually many minorities are paid less than the actual their white counterparts. That is still part of that systemic and institutional racism that we discuss. In terms of the educational opportunities, African Americans and minorities are still not put on that equal playing field or that equitable playing field. And that's actually what people are asking for. But we're fighting against that. We're telling people that, oh, well, hey, it's all over now. Everything. That is not true. There is still a problem within our society. And I'm talking about 2024 when we're finally having the first black female do particular things or the first black male do particular things in 2024. So
you know what to tell me. At the end of the day, the people of your country have rejected DEI. They've rejected this woke stuff.
Let me finish, Shaq. Let me finish, because you're going to try and gaslight and change the conversation.
That was all I wanted to say.
Let me finish real quick. So Adam, when you have admitted in earlier shows or in past discussions that we've had that there is a problem within the education system, even in the black community, because there is a difference in the quality of education that many minorities.
Correct.
And so that within itself points out to you, which I don't know why you say that there isn't, but that within itself is saying that there is a problem with an institution.
Well, I can explain why. The reason is because the Supreme Court in a case called San Antonio School District versus Rodriguez said that property taxes could be the basis for education funding. So that decision has also affected whites in a lot of poor areas like Southern Indiana. So I don't think it was a racist decision, although it has had very bad effects. I agree with you.
And
California got screwed by that decision because we passed property tax reform that has left California starved of educational funds since the late 70s.
But the other issue when it comes to education and other things, right, is that you can go back and look at what black leaders talked about. If you're going to go back and talk about the 60s and the 70s, etc., you go back and talk about what they talked about. They expressed concern about Social Security payments, the way that they were being administered actually meant that families were better off financially by breaking up. They expressed concern about that. We fast forward a couple of generations, and what do we see? We see the very thing that they warned about has actually happened, that a lot of black kids are growing up in single-family households. We saw black educators that talked about problems within the education system and wanting to make changes to how education was going to be funded, in the type of education that would be available, et cetera, et cetera. And they warned that this was going to end up with a two-tiered education system where especially blacks living in so-called ghettos or in poor areas, especially when we talk about New York and places like that, would end up having educational hurdles that they would have to overcome. That would be very challenging. And what's happened? We go forward a couple of generations, and exactly what they warned against has actually occurred. I think it's a bit rich for Democrats of today to complain that Republicans of today. Why are you interrupting me? That Republicans of today are responsible for the discrimination and the systemic racism, etc., that was brought about historically by Democrat policies and reinforced by Democrat policies. And from the analysis that I can see, the worst results that we actually see don't come from Republican states. The biggest disparities that we see come from places today that are run by Democrats.
So what you just stated was parroting what Byron Donalds tried to do in the actual barbershop. That
I've never even watched Byron Donalds.
Okay. Again, it gets back to the messaging, and that is what messaging came out from the Republican Party. That is all false. So again, the stuff that you're talking about, if you talk about the current situation that we're in, as Rick tried to point out earlier, in terms of changing these policies to actually help many minority families, that got blocked by a lot of Republicans. I don't want to turn this into a Republican versus Democrat thing. This is a thing within our society that people have voted against. And these are problems that we run into based on race, because we have situations where people understand, okay, well, this school, which is mostly African-American or mostly Latino or minority school, is underfunded. But hey, let's not take funds and fix that school. That is a policy from the people of the actual people themselves. Because what you forgot to mention in your discussion, you ignored the fact of redlining coming into play. You ignored the fact of all these other policies that came into play. Yes, some were Democrat.
Who was responsible for that? Redlining happened under Democrat control.
Parties, Jack. Both parties.
Both parties did it. It was redlining under both parties. Just really quickly.
When apartheid ended in South Africa, the white South Africans actually went to Democrats to find out exactly how they could enforce. Why do you talk over me all the time?
Well, one is time to end the show because it's all been over in about 5 or 6 minutes and everything. I was going to bring up really quickly, and this is just a historical tidbit because I was going to bring it up earlier. Adam may enjoy this as we close the show, but there was actually a gentleman that I think was yesterday was honored because he was the first black governor of Louisiana. He actually created Southern University, and I think he was of mixed denomination and mixed race and everything. But Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback was the first black governor, not Douglas Wilder of Virginia. So he had the job for literally 35 days. But apparently in those 35 days, he did a lot of work and actually made some legislative decisions. And it was during the time of Reconstruction. But he was
the bottom line is, to all of Jacoby's comments and to everything else that you're talking about, DEI has been rejected across your country. It's being rejected across the Western world. These sorts of ideas, these sort of so-called woke ideas, they've run their course. They've been completely rejected. And I think that Democrats really need to take a breath, pause, and have a look at the situation. Okay, the entire country moved to the right. Even Democrat stronghold areas like New York. Okay. Her results were worse than what they were before. The entire country moved right. And just remember that when CNN, it's probably my favorite footage actually of the election, was when Jake Tapper looked at the map at CNN and said, what counties has she actually increased her results in by 3% or more? And they looked at the map and they're like, huh? And they moved the stuff off the map and he went, not a single one. So look, your ideas are rubbish in my opinion, and you know what? That is the opinion of your country.
You brought it up several times. I didn't even want to go down this path because, in my opinion, we've gone down this path too fucking much, and that's just me discussing, which I usually don't like to do. So I'm getting ready to end the show.
Oh, we're back again. Here's the irony of the whole thing. The party that says they want to include everyone is against diversity, equity, and inclusion.
That's